Now let's move on, okay? I've stressed enough that you don't want to track too much and that you don't want to have a billion metrics. Now, how do you do this? Well, first, we need to start out with a plan. And I see many people get this wrong. They just go out and start implementing, and that's horrible. You never want to do it. Let's make sure that we have a plan before we get started. Now, one thing I want to make sure that you understand is I recommend to start out using Segment. Segment is a data piping tool, aka also known as the Rosetta Stone of APIs. What it allows you to do is write one line of JavaScript, which is automatically converted into everybody else's native JavaScripts. So imagine adding one JavaScript to your website, and now you have Kissmetrics, Mixpanel, Woopra, every other analytics tool already added, like a tag manager would, but you could also write one line of code, and that works with all three platforms automatically. So definitely take the chance to check out Segment and see what it's all about. Now, the next thing I want to make sure that you understand is that event-driven analytics are made up of two primary things. You have events and you have properties. Now, to make it very, very simple, events are the actions taken by a user. Now, an event property is going to be the context about that action. So for an example, if I was to jump right now, some of the event would probably be jumped. Now, the property or the context around that would probably be things like how high I jumped, what color shirt was I wearing, maybe even what color hair I had. But these are all going to be the context around the jump. What we want to do is make sure that our events are somewhat vague, and then we allow our event properties to obviously describe them. Now, I will let you know this. You want to make sure that this works with whatever analytics tool you're working with. Some platforms treat event properties and events a little bit differently. A use case is the fact that Kissmetrics and Mixpanel treat properties differently, and you want to understand how that platform works before you go and implement. Now, you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, there's also a nice bit.ly link there that says Analytics Spec. If you go to that URL, you will actually be taken to our website, and you'll actually see all the versions of these analytics specs. Now, what I want to show you on the screen is a small cutout of what that analytics spec looks like. Now, what the spec is a document that we're able to use to plan out all of our events and also all of our properties. This is going to enable you to sit down and really think out everything you need to track and make sure you get it done correctly before you even go out there and implement any code. Now, just to explain a few things, and you'll see my mouse on the screen, all the way on the left-hand side, you'll notice we have sprint. This is going to describe when this is going to be done. Is this in sprint 1, sprint 2, or sprint 3? If you have a development team, they probably do weekly or bi-weekly sprints. This just means that the scope of work for those 2 weeks is locked down, and then they go and develop that amount of scope. Now, you can, of course, use this in our table to make it so that you can break this up into multiple sprints, but I'll talk more about that later. You'll also notice we have server versus client side. This just means whether they're going to be writing JavaScript, which lives directly on your website, or whether they're going to be writing maybe Ruby on Rails or Python that actually lives on the server. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it as well is a very important thing that you notate on this. But we'll talk more about that in developer section. You'll also notice that we have integrated, which is going to let us know whether this has been done. There's WIP, which WIP means work in progress, and then as well as completed, which just means it's been integrated. Now, some of the important things about this sheet that I want to make sure you understand are how we can get set up correctly so we can plan. We'll notice that we have the event. Just like before, I said this is going to be the action the user took. So in this case, it's going to be viewed case study. And this is going to be sent anytime somebody views a case study. So anytime somebody comes to my website, views a case study, this event will be sent. Now, we very much describe this in the trigger below. And we want to make sure that we add a lot of context as to why and how this is sent. Later, this document is going to be sent to a developer, and they're going to have to make sense of all of the madness you wrote. So please be descriptive and as well as write things nicely. I'll skip over the audit part. We'll come back to that later. But you'll notice that we do have property name and property value. Now, what these are going to be the event property name and then as well as the value of that. So for an example, the name is going to be the category in essence of what it is. So when we think about this, well, we need to say case study. For whenever we want to know what type of case study they actually viewed or whose case study they viewed. So the property name is case study, and the value is going to be K-Ginger Consulting because that's the actual case study they had viewed. Now, let's say, for an example, they had viewed the GIMME Growth case study. What they would see is, once again, case study because it's the same property name, but we would now have GIMME Growth as the property value because that was the actual case study that they had viewed. Just like the event, we want to make sure we have lots of description. We want to describe this so people can effectively know what this means and when it's supposed to happen. So do make sure that you write a lot of wording in here so we know what happens. Now, because our docs are fancy, you'll notice we do also have a JavaScript formula over there for you. So if you do write out all of this information, it will create a nice JavaScript example for you. So please go check out the spec, use it. It's definitely going to help you out a lot. What you want to do is you want to take this spec and go to your website and build out all of your events first. So what you want to do is go through your website and think about the things that your users would do, which would create a funnel. I always recommend to start with acquisition, then move into the next stage. So as I explained earlier, this is going to be the action somebody takes to the site. Now, because this action is always going to be looked at past tense, we want to make sure that we use a past tense verb. So as you heard me say earlier, I didn't say jump, I say jumped, right? And that's because I'm not actually jumping when I look at this data. This is data that had happened in the past. So make sure that you make it past tense. Now, as well as the property is going to be an adjective. So try to make these descriptive. Right? It's really, really important that they make sense and they describe the action that had happened. You can very much think about it in this manner. An event is going to be a verb because it's an action. And then the adjective is, or excuse me, the property is going to be the adjective which describes that verb, right? An adverb. So I don't think we need to combine them together, but just so you know, that's kind of the thought process. Now, when you use this sheet, you're going to want to write out your event names, then as well as the triggers, and then continuously write out the properties so you have a nice documented plan. I want you to start at the home page, go all the way through your funnel until the time somebody purchases, and start to track the things that they do. Things like signed up, completed onboarding, added a seat to their account, or even viewed the upgrade page. Those are all actions that you want to track, which make up your funnel, so make sure you put them down in this plan. I'll talk more about how we're going to use this, but take the time, think it out, and write all of those things down. If something needs to get deleted later, don't worry about it. We'll be able to take care of that. Now, all of the analytics platforms are going to use events and then as well as event properties. So we definitely want to make sure these get set up. But there are some platforms as well that do customer profiles. So when you think about platforms like Woopra, Mixpanel, and Kissmetrics, even Amplitude, what they enable you to do is store attributes about your customer so you can use those later for analysis and sometimes even notifications. Now, when you think about these in platforms like Mixpanel, you'll have a separate thing called people properties, which you have to leverage to do this. So when you look at the spec guide, you will see that we do have people properties in there. They're directly linked to the events because these are the things that we update after somebody does an action. So for an example, as we talked about in the event, they viewed the case study, and that case study was K-Ginger Consulting. Well, because it was sent as an event, that is simply on the behavior side of the platform. If I later wanted to use this information to understand or to send email notifications or understand which case studies led this person to a conversion, I also want to store this as a person profile. So what we're going to notice is the case study is viewed, we have K-Ginger Consulting, and then we describe that as well. Once again, we have server client, and then we have some notes and documentation. But there's more interesting ones that you may want to do, such as knowing how many case studies did a person view before they subscribed. So for an example, we have quantity case studies viewed. So what actually happens in platforms like Mixpanel is every time they view a case study, we increment this value by 1 on their back end. And what happens is every time they view one, they increment by 1. We now see that 5 case studies being viewed, you're more likely to convert into being a customer. Now, with that being said, if we're able to identify these properties and they are indicative of a subscription, well, now we need to know that, or now we need to show people more case studies. We need to find out unique ways to show people case studies, which give them a better perception on why they should buy. And this is something that you can very easily do if you set up your analytics correctly. Now, once again, all you have to do is go to this URL at the bottom of the page and you'll be able to get the spec. So let us know if you have any questions. Now, once you've done this, I want you to sit down with your team, only the marketing team, maybe the CEO, and do an internal review. Okay, maybe even just sit down with your marketing associate or even sit down with your director of marketing, right? Let's try to make this simple. What we first want to do is make sure that the naming makes sense. I've seen companies that have registered as an event for one page, and then they have signed up as the same event on another page. Now, the problem is that registered and signed up will look as 2 different events inside of any analytics tool. Now, if I try to run my numbers, I don't know which one I should look at because I have registered over here and I have signed up over here. So what you're going to want to do is get people involved that understand that we are going to either use the word registered or we're going to use the word signed up. And then we also want to make sure that all of these things are kept nice and short. I don't want you to write they viewed the homepage with all kinds of extra text, right? Like, we don't need to know everything in there. What we want to do is keep the name short or it won't appear in the UI. Now, obviously, with short names, we want to make sure that we're being as clear as possible. So try not to use acronyms. Try to use clear words so everybody on your team can understand. I cannot stress to you enough how important nomenclature is in these types of sheets. And the reason why is that when you hire 5 new people, they need to be able to read this document and immediately understand what it means in analytics. Now, when they go into the analytics tool, they shouldn't be demystified by the ACR that you have written in there, because they have no idea that means acquired customer recently, right? You should make sure that all of this stuff is readable and that a stupid person can read it quickly. Now, another thing I want you to understand, which is an advanced feature, most people don't get to know this, is that when you have the opportunity to say true or false, you should actually leave the date. So when we have a customer that's stored in analytics and we say subscribed, we shouldn't say subscribed equals true or subscribed equals false. What we should do is say subscribed equals 9/21/2016. And the reason why is because we can look back and now see that date, and if the date exists, we can say it's true. But if nothing exists, we now can know that that actually is false. But knowing the date something happened is extremely important. So what I want you to take very seriously is when you have something true or false, also known as a Boolean, you want to make sure that you use a date instead. Now last, while you're doing this internal review of your team, I want you to make sure that you consolidate as much as possible. Depending on the analytics platform, if you're using a tool like Mixpanel, you should have an event called page viewed, and then you should describe what page it is by using the properties. This is really, really important. Now, when you use Mixpanel, that's the case. But on the flip side, if you're using Kissmetrics, you should have viewed homepage. The reason why is because they both think about data differently. And that's the reason why I stress to you, make sure you understand which tool will be best for you and which tool is going to be best for your implementation process. Now that we've done this internal review, let's make sure that everyone agrees on this. There's a few things that we've learned over the past couple of years while doing these implementations which make it really, really helpful. Now, when you do this review with your team, you're going to want to review everything, okay? Don't leave any stone unturned. We want to talk about all of it. Now, one thing that we learned is that we do not delete anything off the spec. If we make a decision that we do not want to track an event, or an event cannot be used, or a property cannot be captured, put a strike through on it. It's Command-Shift-S on your keyboard with Google Sheets, but use a strike through, okay? Do not delete it, because what we want to understand is in 6 months from now, we want to say, hey, did we try to track this at some point? And then we potentially want to understand why we did not track that. So if you leave a strike through, we know that it can't be tracked now. I would also leave a comment on that saying why, or a note, but don't delete it from the sheet. Really, really bad idea to delete it. Now, once again, as I stressed earlier, leave great details on what an event or a property is. The more descriptive you are, the more accurate it will be. Now, if you have a problem with writing descriptions, go find somebody in your office that's better than you and have them write the descriptions. Because I have somebody else in my office that wrote a spec for me last week, and there was no descriptions at all. It literally just said they viewed the pricing page. And the problem is the customer has 3 different pricing pages. Well, which pricing page was it? Well, unfortunately, they only meant the subscription pricing page. They didn't explain that, so now the development was done incorrectly, which causes further issues. I want to stress to you that you need to write descriptions, long-form descriptions. Now, lastly, this spec is going to be your Bible for analytics. Okay? You want to understand that this needs to be accurate, this needs to be clean, this needs to be loyal, it needs to be everything you've ever thought about when you think about the Bible. It just needs to be good, right? At the end of the day, this is going to be something that your marketing team, your product team, your engineering team uses as a guide to understand what's going on in analytics. And if you do a shitty job, it means you're just going to have shitty data. Nobody wants shitty data. Now, as I said earlier, you need to make sure this all works with whatever analytics tool you're going to use. Now, don't take my word for it on what's a good analytics tool, and don't go sign up for Mixpanel just because I talked about it 10 times in this presentation. Find out what the best tool is for your business and what's going to work best for you. Then design your spec around that, and then go back and do a gut check and make sure all of that information still works with your analytics tool.